Hello, everybody, and welcome to Masterclass Screenwriting. This is week one. Thanks for joining us. This is going to be a really interesting new type of a workshop. We're looking to look at screenwriting, but also look at what is writing in general for digital arts, digital media. How does this work? How can it work? And we're going to look at different formats, different digital media arts formats, and ways of telling our stories. So we're going to look at film, video, documentary, narrative. So we're going to look at that whole fictional, and then also documentaries and factual and audio podcasts. So it's going to be a real fun-filled journey. We're going to take some time, look at software, look at formats, look at styles, and then also have some Q&A time. I'm going to provide my email too, so you can definitely get into any kind of information, discussions, and if you have questions, you can always ask me those as well. So my name is Tom Strand. I'm a lead digital artist of the Creator Space project. So again, thanks for joining us. And we have, I know a lot of people are joining us, so really excited to have a nice full class to go over this. So I just want to start off by thanking all our partners in this project. So we have the Canada Council for the Arts, then we have our library partners. So we have the Blue Mountains Public Library, Collingwood Public Library, and we have the Wasaga Beach Public Library. So what's really great is that what's available through all our library partners, this kind of workshop, this whole project, but we also have computer workstations. So we call them digital arts workstations, and these are iMac, 27-inch iMac computers, and we've put Final Draft on that. So that software is available there, the one I'll be going through over the next few weeks. The other thing is the software is available at a low cost, about $25 Canadian, on the App Store, and you can be used on any iOS device. So it's for iPad, iPhone, and you can use it there. It's a little bit of more of a limited software, but you could start on your iPad or iPhone and then come to the Creator Space computer stations at the library partners, where you can then use the Final Draft software in its entirety from your script file that you create on your iPad or iPhone. So it's a really great tool that could be available to make that happen, and work with within the in the realm of getting your screenwriting going and making everything work. Okay, so let's get right into today's conversations. So here's a bit of an overview. So we're going to look at what is screenwriting, story structure, getting an idea started, the formats for storytelling in digital media arts. So all those different types of media arts concepts of how we can do it, and then the idea of research before writing. So we'll talk a bit about that as well. So a lot of stuff to cover, and the good thing is we have some time. So we have today, and like I said, we have 3 more weeks after that. So it's going to be the same time, Wednesdays throughout February, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., and we're going to have this master class in screenwriting. Now the great thing is, what I want to encourage too is we have in-person workshops starting in March, and we're going to have one on cinematography, then we're going to move into one on production, we're going to get into editing and so on. So I hope it's limited spaces, but if you're in the area here, you're a member of any of our 3 library partners, you have priority access to this workshop, so please sign up, and it'll be happening at the Craigleith Community Center, and those will be 4-week workshops. So from there, we hope to take people's story ideas and scripts and then explore how they can translate to actually being produced. So we're also going to do an audio podcast workshop later in May or June, just waiting to schedule that. So that's really exciting. So what you're doing here will have some hands-on opportunity. And then the good thing is, from those workshops, we'll be able to share some of the videos and kind of media, what's created in those workshops. So we'll share that with the greater community of the Creator Space students or attendees of this project, so that we can share that with you as well. Okay, so what is screenwriting? Screenwriting, big bold letters, words here. So I think what's really cool always is that screenwriting at the end of the day is the art and craft of writing a screenplay or script for media. Screenplays can be original works, or they can be adapted from other writing. And I think that's important too, is that we can take a book, a short story, a poem, and I want us to start thinking beyond just other written work, but what about if you're adapting, let's say, a piece of music? you are a musician and you want to maybe write a story about the song in terms of a film. That could be the production of a music video. So we'll talk about things like that too. Other different types of, I guess, genres within film and video production and how that can work. Screenplays will include the movement, actions, expression, and dialogue of the characters. And again, that's the traditional definition of screenplay. And as we'll see today, as we get out of that kind of those traditional concepts, we're going to look at, how does this apply in documentary production and in, factual, non-scripted ideas, right? So how does that work? And we really want to try to understand how that will work, and as we kind of expand on this idea of screenwriting, because oftentimes we think about, okay, screenwriting, script, film, fiction, film, that's it. But this tool of screenwriting can be really important for a lot of things. And I even challenge anyone out there to, if you're doing, let's say, digital illustration, music, what if you wrote a little script about something before to help you, inspire you how you can then do a drawing? So I think there's a lot of opportunities in being able to take this into other realms and other areas, and how and seeing how that can potentially work in terms of what can be used out there, and these tools, how can they be used in other art forms in digital arts as well. Okay, so elements of a story. Robert McKee, very famous screenwriter, has lots of books, and I encourage you to check out some of his stuff. Quite a big resource and knowledge base for the screenwriting universe out there. So if he has this really great statement, and I always like to use this: a beautifully told story is a symphonic unity in which structure, setting, character, genre, and idea meld seamlessly. To find their harmony, the writer must study the elements of story as if they were instruments of an orchestra, first separately, then in concert. So isn't that really interesting? So taking that idea of a symphony, where you have to start with each instrument, and then you think of it as a whole. So that's what we want to look at, is what are each of these instruments or sections of an orchestra. So you don't just write a whole symphony orchestra. You have to start thinking about, okay, well, what are the woodwinds going to do? What about the brass, percussion, strings, and so on? And how is all of this going to play? How are individual instruments? What does the violin do while the trumpet does something else? And then together it creates that beautiful symphonic music. And that's the same idea. So we have settings, locations, actions described. Then we have characters, and then we have their dialogue, and we have their movements and their actions. So all of that together creates the entire story. And then on the other side, when we break down the non-fictional side, the factual side, it's very similar too. There's still very much elements. We have dialogue now in the form of either narration or interview audio, and that's our dialogue. Our interviews become the dialogue, and the dialogue between the interviewer and the interviewee. That becomes a symphony in its way as well. But those are individual elements. You might have multiple interviews, and stacking all those interviews and understanding what kind of interviews you need. Wouldn't it be great if you can start to kind of prearrange that? That's what we want to start thinking of as we're getting into screenwriting for documentaries, is how do you figure out what interviews you want to do ahead of time and what the interviews can roughly contain. You have an idea of, okay, this is what I want to achieve. But if you put it down, it's a lot better and concrete to go into the interview if you can know what you want to achieve ahead of time. So start thinking of it that way. Then audio podcast, same idea. We can, it's all the whole instrumentation and everything. But now we have to deal with having audio, represent the visuals. So now we have to really describe everything through our audio, or try to create spaces through our audio. So it's a really interesting thing. So one of the main tools, or one of the main concepts, I should say, in screenwriting to think of, and kind of the controlling idea of how to write scripts, is show, don't tell. So, you're trying to not tell an audience what they should feel, what they should think. And that's kind of like with music. So you're hearing it, and, you're hearing, but you're not necessarily telling someone like, oh, this, the conductor doesn't say, okay, by the way, this song is going to make you feel really sad. You're going to hear the music, and it will evoke those types of emotions, and different emotions. So sadness can be many things for many different people. So that's the idea here, is that we're show, don't tell. And now with audio podcasts, we have to kind of broaden that controlling concept of screenwriting in documentaries and in so documentaries will have a bit of that too. You might need to kind of describe some things in narration, and so we have to kind of exclude that show don't tell in these other mediums or formats, and that's why we have to make exceptions to these screenplay rules for other types of formats. Audio podcasts, you might need a narrator telling us exactly, what a train station looks like, or exactly what the inside of the car looks like, where it's messy and there's food. You can't show that because you're hearing it, so you need someone to describe what's happening. So think of it kind of like an audio podcast ends up being more like reading a book, where narrators and the author has to describe everything for you, what it will look like. But then we have to add that into that idea of the audio podcast. So just a lot of things to think about. I know I'm throwing a lot of ideas out here, but things to think about as you get into writing. Okay, so the 3-act story structure, and I think this applies to really any kind of story you want to tell. Oftentimes, you might be with friends, family, someone starts telling a story, and that kind of timeless joke always is, well, we'll get to the point. What's the point? And that's really always the thing of any kind of storytelling is, what is the point? If your story doesn't have a point, then it's not really a story. It needs to have a beginning, middle, and end, and that's where we get into this 3-act structure. So we have the Act 1, we establish something. Act 2, we build. Act 3, resolution, climax, aka the point. That is the point of the story. Okay, this is what happened, this is what resolved, and so on. So that's really crucial to think of everything as a 3-act structure. So even if you're telling someone a joke or something that happened the day before, you start with establishing, okay, this is I was sitting in a coffee shop and there was a thunderstorm outside, so a bunch of people came inside and the coffee shop got really packed. That establishes what's happening. The build up then is, okay, the lightning ended up sending a bolt through the coffee shop, and it seemed to go through the metal structures of pipes, and everyone was frightened. Okay, building up, oh my God, what's going to happen? I don't know what's happening. This is exciting, rising action. So this is, again, a quick story. And then the resolution is that everybody runs out of the coffee shop. You just stayed put and nothing happened. It was okay. But everyone ran inside. So the point is everyone ran inside because of lightning. The lightning kind of followed them in. Ha ha ha. Kind of the punchline. Everybody ran out because they were afraid of the lightning bolt that came inside through the water pipes. A weird story, but again, the point is, establish rising action, something's happening, boiling, okay, people are there, there's this bolt is shooting through the coffee shop, they're scared, people start running out, you get to just stay there and you don't have to worry about leaving as well. So what brought people in brings people out. That's kind of the point. It's interesting how, human nature, lots of different themes in there. So it's a simple story, but it's an effective story in showcasing that really rudimentary 3-act structure. What is the point? If I just said there was a lot of thunder, lightning, rain, everybody came into the coffee shop, and I ended it there, what's the point? I'm just saying, that's obvious. Yeah, it's raining, it's going to get busy, and then that could just be like a complaint. It's not a story if I just say, oh, it got really busy, everyone was packed in there. But I start to tell the story when I build that action and say the lightning bolt seemed to come in through the water pipe, and it was circling through, a lightning ball was circling through the coffee shop, and really scaring people as there was a bright flash sparking around through metal objects around in the coffee shop. And that makes it interesting. So I start to have a point, and that's really important. So always think about that just having, if you just establish something, you need to figure out always what the point is. And that becomes that whole idea of the controlling idea. What is at the center of your story? What is the main point is the controlling idea. So everything's leading towards something. So as you get into a more complicated story, we can start to have backstories, learning about where all these people come from, and that coffee shop incident could be like the finale where, there's people that are fighting to close the coffee shop because something happened in there and so on, and all these same people end up in the coffee shop. So there's a great way to deal with it. One of the really interesting things, and I've heard a lot about Wes Anderson's writing style, writer-director, is that, he'll often come up with just an idea like, okay, I'm going to write something about this magazine in France, like the French Dispatch, his latest film, and that's what it's going to be, and like articles shown visually about what these different journal pieces are, and it's like a New Yorker type magazine and run by an American company in France. So that's the controlling idea, is that he just wants to have some sort of a story about this magazine and so on. And then, that's the essence of what that story is going to be. But that's not a full story. We don't have any kind of structure and going through it. So even though it's kind of a series of short stories, there's still an underlying 3-act structure that builds to a final ending, and that takes us through the whole story. So that's always important. So even if you say, I just want to make something about a bicycle that's going through the forest and it ends up there abandoned. Maybe it's something you saw one day and you're like, I really want to write a story about how does a bicycle just end up abandoned on the side of the forest, on the side of the road in the forest. And so you can build a whole story around that. And that's kind of that whole interesting idea. But from there, if I just say, hey, I saw a bike abandoned in the forest, again, not a story. But I have to build something up. So how did the bike get there? What happens to the person? And and then what's the finale of the big reveal, the big resolution, if you will, of how it goes. So all these things to think about. Okay, so getting an idea started, that brings us right into here. So start with a concept, and I encourage everyone, you can just write a 1-sentence concept. It doesn't have to be really overly complex or anything. And the sentence has a beginning, middle, and end, right? So, the sentence can be pretty long. I know it's hard to fit everything, but the one line, this is kind of that key thing. A lot of people, especially in film and television industry circles, you'll always be asked with having a one line. What is your one line synopsis? And it might sound absurd, but a good story can be identified in one sentence. And if it's complex and maybe it doesn't have an exact direction or point, you might struggle to write that one sentence. So it's almost like starting with that concept of writing the one-line sentence is almost kind of a test to see, hey, can this story hold up? Does it make sense? Does it work? Is there a beginning, middle, and end? Can I describe it in one sentence? If I can't, maybe it's overly complicated and I need to really hone down onto, and focus in on what exactly the story is that I want to tell. And that can really help you with the writing. So by developing this one-line synopsis, I say start with that, because that gives you the whole guiding principle of what your script will be, whatever it is. Again, fictional, factual, audio podcast, music video, whatever it is. That one sentence will help guide what it is, right? So going back to that idea again of like the coffee shop, right? So, a man sits in it could be a short film about a man who sits in a coffee shop, who is overwhelmed by a crowd, fleeing a lightning bolt, only to find the bolt, enter the coffee shop, and they all flee for their lives. Again, overly complicated. It's probably not the best one-line sentence, but that kind of idea. So, it could be, a coffee shop is overwhelmed by people fleeing from a lightning bolt that follows them in, and pandemonium ensues, right? So something like that. So that one sentence will be really important. So take your favorite film, think about what that one sentence can be. What is the one idea? So again, something similar like that French Dispatch, a collection of short essays representing the writing of the American-owned French Dispatch magazine and the writers and people behind it. Okay, that could be the one line, something like that. And so take that idea, and the great thing is with this one line, as when you start writing, you're gonna have that. By the time you finish writing your script or your treatment or like your outline of what you want to do, that will evolve, and then you'll have a better sense of how to finish the one line. So the one line is kind of like a very early draft or hypothesis that you can go back to and then refine. It's kind of like if you're writing an essay. That opening paragraph you will probably refine a dozen times. As you go through it, your research, things expand, and you're going to refine it because you want a really strong opening. And that's kind of that one line, is that it's a really strong, concise sentence statement of what your script or what your film, video, audio podcast is about. So it's ever evolving. So don't worry if it's, as I just gave you a couple examples, they're not necessarily the best, most concise and elegant types of one line samples, but it will evolve as I write that kind of a story. Okay, so other things to think about. Use stories that you're familiar with. So when you're working, especially when you're working on your first scripts, write what you know. It's a lot easier to start writing about what you know and experiences. So that coffee shop example, for example, is if that didn't happen, but it's something that I'm familiar with. I've seen lightning go through homes as a child with this kind of lightning balls, that phenomenon. I've seen it, and so it's something that I've experienced. And then I understand with coffee shops, it can be really annoying when there's a lot of people show up all of a sudden, especially when there's bad weather. You see a lot of people always run in when it's raining, and then you're kind of overwhelmed in your nice quiet zone that you might have in a coffee shop. So, taking those personal experiences, those ideas, and then making it into a script. And that really helps you write what you know. So if you are, you are an astronomy fan, write about a story maybe that deals with astronomy or characters that are linked or working in astronomy fields or who also enjoy astronomy, because then those characters will jump off the page because you're going to be writing what you know versus just writing something that you don't know if you're unfamiliar with it. Now eventually, as you go from your first script to future scripts and many scripts, you're going to start to want to expand out of that, but you still will usually base things on maybe an article you read or someone you've met or an experience you had can still be the basis that forms a good story. And again, it will be, if it's personal, write what you know and write what you want to write, right? Don't try to fit into something else because, I want to write like that. Write something that, you're going to spend a lot of potentially hours, days, months, even years writing a screenplay. So write something that you actually want to tell that story. Something that you're passionate about telling as well. Don't just write it because, I want to do a film like this other film I saw. So if you write what you know, write what you're passionate about, it's going to come off the page a lot more naturally and easily. So, then you have to develop characters that are required to tell that story. So then you have to start thinking about, okay, what are your main supporting, so that idea of the protagonist, the antagonist. So protagonist, the good guy, antagonist, the bad guy, that kind of classic idea. So if you start thinking about that, develop the characters that you need to tell the story. And it should become evident once you have that one line, because okay, I need, for example, again, that one person sitting in the coffee shop. I need a bunch of other people coming to the coffee shop. I'll need the coffee shop owner, and and then what is that? So the main person would be in the coffee shop. Maybe the supporting is a friend that comes in as well, and then the antagonist could be maybe the coffee shop owner that is screaming at everyone. So it's kind of the bad guy. Okay, get out of here, right? So that kind of idea, and that gives us that yin and yang, and really gives us that positive and negative pulses to make stories interesting. And that's really important to have that. You need to have the good, the evil. If everything is just good, it's not really developing any kind of drama. And same with documentaries. You need to have, you're pushing that idea. Something is, there needs to be some negative forces or tension as well. And it's hard to just have it all just positive, right? So you need that blend of positive, negative. What is that? And that could just be, it doesn't have to even be characters. Worked on a film about an apple harvest season. And one of the biggest antagonists was nature, and just dealing with what nature can do, the unpredictability of it, and how hard it is to harvest, to grow any kind of farming with climate change and with unpredictable weather patterns that we see more and more now, and also extreme weather patterns where there's dry to extreme precipitation that is damaging with flooding fields So it's really an interesting idea. So the last thing here that's a great idea is a beat board. And this can be just, you can use recipe cards. You can do this in a draft on a word processing software. And the beat board can help you really draft out that overall structure. And it can just be like words, quick phrases. So, man in coffee shop, lightning flashes outside, like those kinds of beats of key moments that are happening in the structure of the story. And again, that will help you figure out what your beginning, middle, climax, and end or resolution is. So that's really important, is to set up some sort of a beat board to help guide you through what it is that the story is that you're trying to tell, and how you can tell it. Okay, so from there, let's start to get into some of the formats of storytelling in digital media, and how that works, because that could be really interesting in terms of the what it can do, and how it can do it. And so what exactly does that mean? So different formats for storytelling can really help you tell stories in different ways. And I think that's the fun part, is that oftentimes we think, okay, there's screenwriting, there's the narrative film, we see the screenplays, we see films, that's really one type. But the formats are really interesting, because now we can start to think about, okay, I could be writing these scripts that could maybe even be used for a piece of music, or maybe a music video to tell the story of that piece of music. I could be writing a script maybe for a dance performance, or I can be writing a script that maybe I want to then draw and express through painting, or maybe through a series of comics, or making a comic book out of it, or graphic novel. So there's really interesting ways how the script can be then used for other types of mediums or formats, I've called it in this case. So, what kind of formats do we typically see in our script writing? And this is what we will be looking at through this masterclass. So we're going to look at narrative film, so that whole fictional storytelling, that kind of standard, traditional type of script writing, and what that means. Then we're going to look at documentary film, and that's the other format, documentary film, or known as factual storytelling. So this is where we get into, with interviews and telling the stories, and getting people to understand what that is. That's really an interesting way to look at writing as well, because oftentimes we think documentaries just kind of happen. You just go and film things and it just happens, but you really want to sit down and write for a documentary as well. Then you have your audio podcast, so that can be fictional or factual storytelling without visuals, and that's the whole thing. So it's only audio. So now we get into what is traditionally, screenwriting is a very visual format. Again, that whole idea, show, don't tell. So you're showing everything through descriptions. You're showing what happens. You're not telling the audience what happens. So you're showing them the whole time as that underlying writing rule. But now when you get into audio podcasts, you can't show the audience, because they won't be able to see anything. They're just going to hear stuff. So what's really important is to then, now you need to tell a bit of what you need to see. So we have to start to think about that a little bit differently in the screenwriting process. Then we might have a hybrid, and this is kind of an exciting one. We see more and more of this, but a documentary that is fictional. So a mockumentary is often what it's referred to. So we see some really great series. There's some things like The Office. What a great series! Many seasons of it, and it's well viewed, well liked, well enjoyed, and I think a lot of people do enjoy that series. So what does that what does that mean? And what it means is that you have this creative license in a hybrid model, where you can write what the interviewee says. So you can be doing an interview, but it's scripted. So you create characters and you make it look like a documentary, but you're actually writing what the characters do, how they react, how they act, and what happens to them. And that's the real hybrid fun part, is getting into that idea of showing people what it's like in a specific area. So like The Office, what's it, working in this office, this paper supply company, and really funny things happen. And then we get into mockumentaries that can be like a horror film type mockumentary. So what we do in the shadows, the whole mockumentary about vampires living together in a reality TV show of following them around, seeing what they do, struggling to get into restaurants or nightclubs because they have to be invited in to enter a location. So that whole idea, playing around with that mythology of the vampire and then putting them into a what it would be like to make a documentary series with a group of vampires who live together, and what happens from that. And then it's gone into a TV series as well. So that mockumentary side is really interesting. Great films like Waiting for Guffman, really fantastic mockumentary about a small town community theater group waiting for this New York City critic that's going to come out and write a review, and then they're hoping to take this original production into to Broadway, that it's going to become this hit because of the review that they hope to get from Guffman. So great, fantastic ideas of how you can you can create these types of hybrid models, and I think that's a real exciting area to look at. Okay, so working on scripts for different formats. So one of our first ones we'll look at here is, okay, so screenplay for narrative film. What does that mean? This is the basis of the screenplay and screenwriting. So script formatting can be achieved using software or with separate, or with any kind of word processing software as well. So that's really an interesting thing of how creating a format consists of the scenes with headings. So that'll be like your setting, action, description of what is seen visually, and then characters with dialogue. And that's a very traditional type thing. So what does that look like? Let me just get. I'm just going to get this screen going. Just trying to get this iPad to show up here. Hopefully that'll work. Okay, it's just giving me a little bit of a problem here. So what I'm going to do, let's just move over to, I have Final Draft here on this actual desktop here. So it's going to go right into the desktop here, and we'll sort that out to later. So I'm using Final Draft 12, and I'm going to open up one of these demo scripts that I've been working on before. And Final Draft 12, so this is what's available through the CreatorSpace project. So you can find these this software and these Final Draft on the digital arts computers. So there's the iMacs. So if we look at here, this is basically the script writing format. So we have scene 1, and then we set up where it is. So interior mansion, evening. So we say the location, the setting. So this is the scene heading. Time of day, evening. It can be day, morning, night. Then we describe what's happening, what we are seeing. So a young woman sits alone at a large oak dining room table. Using her chopsticks, she wrangles a small piece of sushi. A ghost walks behind her. She spins her head towards it. Susie, loudly. So we have now the character, and we're expressing how they talk. So tone, loudly, scared, struggling, anything. So leave me alone, Susie. Right? Then we have ghost, softly. We have work to do before the morning comes. Right? So expressing that the ghost will have a softer tone. So we're, those are some audio notes. The ghost takes the chopsticks and stabs the sushi roll with the other end of the chopstick going into the wooden table. Susie sits still as the ghost sits down in a chair across the table from her. The ghost breathes heavily. So that's our scenes and our descriptions, characters, dialogue. So this is the screenplay format that's been around for very, very long time. This was established early. And the idea is that it gives you a quick overview, that you have scene numbers, Then you have, what's happening in terms of um, what's happening in terms of the description. So describing what occurs. And then we're looking at the characters, the character names, and then we're looking at what do they say, their dialogue, different another character, then we have more description. So it's really scene heading, description, character names with their dialogue centered, and then more description. And this is how the whole script works. And that's really the magic behind it. It's not too complicated. It's a great and easy formatting system that works quite well. And it's it's a unique way to to be able to tell these stories. So you know and you can see quickly, this is the whole thing with the screenplay format. It lets you identify who the characters are really quickly, what the dialogue is right away, so you can really go through it efficiently and understand, okay, here's the dialogue, and here's the descriptions. And the other thing that's really cool about the screenplay format is generally one page equals to about 1 minute of screen time. And writing it in this format, it always seems to work out that way, where it kind of averages out. One page might be a little bit longer, the one's a bit shorter, but it averages out to about a minute a page. So 10-page script will be about 10 minutes. 100-page script will be about 100 minutes. So that's the real fun thing about this format. It helps us understand, kind of what lengths we're going to have and so on. So then you can see there's exterior school day, mansion, and I keep going from there. And then here, I just had some notes of, what title sequence, photos of Susie and her family. So just things to try to establish what's going on and how this works and that kind of whole idea of this show and how it would work. Okay, so let me get back into the slides here. So that's basically our screenplay, format concept there. So now for documentary screenwriting, it's a little bit different. So we have, documentary screenwriting or treatments. This works a little bit differently because now we are, working in a format that becomes more hypothetical. So it's more of a hypothetical story that outlines what you hope to achieve and capture through your documentary film. And that's, I think, really, interesting, is how does that work? How does that blend into the idea of writing something? So what I, propose here, what I think is really important for documentary screenwriting treatments, is to outline what you hope to achieve and capture through your documentary film. So a script or a treatment, so a treatment is a paragraph-based outline of what occurs. So instead of using that script format, it might just be paragraphs. It could be as simple as 3 paragraphs to represent the beginning, middle, and end of your story. So that script or treatment is important in order for you want to start to get an understanding of what needs to be filmed. So what kind of interviews do you need to capture? Who do you need to interview? And what kind of footage will you get? So there's, what do you visually capture? So if this is about someone who works in a factory, you're going to want to consider getting shots of the person working in the factory. If this is something about fishing, you want to go out and get fishing, farming, so on. You get the idea there. So, and then what kind of stock footage you might need. So if it's a historical documentary, maybe someone talking about what happened in the 60s, you're going to want to consider, can I get stock footage, or maybe the person has photos. So all of this should be put into kind of a treatment idea, what it's going to look like. You might have some visual references. I often like with documentaries to put some visuals. Okay, it's going to be this kind of some visual aesthetic. So maybe like posters, graphic design, art. You might even have music references. All these kinds of things kind of give you that style of what this documentary is going to be about, because you then can focus when you go to film the documentary to keep trying to complement your decisions in style and process and approach of what it will look like. So that's, I think, really important. And then, what interviews, are you going to conduct? What interviews may require different approaches and techniques. So you can start to think about even what the documentary will look like with those visual references. How will you achieve it? But again, the more information and guidance, the better. So especially when you're starting a documentary, when you're starting out, this could be your first documentary, you want to really have that blueprint. And this will help guide you through the process and make sure that you're really getting what you hope to achieve and get, and not have issues with in trying to get in some other way. So if you have that guide, it helps you focus on making sure you get everything to get that beginning, middle, and end of your documentary story. So that's, I think, really, really key. Okay, audio podcast script writing. So again, very different than the documentary, but we're going back to that same idea with screenplays. So the main difference here is that between the two is, for audio podcasts, you'll no longer include visual references or descriptions. So it's audio only. So anything visual can be, it ends up being described by narration or dialogue. So that's a really important aspect, is that it's done differently. So it's totally, you're achieving it, with that approach versus having those visual abilities. So you can't show things. So now, because it's audio only, one of the things that you need to do in writing your script for an audio podcast is anything visual can now be described by narration or dialogue. So you can have a narrator describing where you are, what's happening, that kind of approach. At the same time, for documentary podcast writing, it would involve a similar process. That's the same idea. You're writing that treatment, and you might really focus a lot on narration for the audio podcast. You might want to have that all written before. One of the things, though, I find with an audio podcast, if you're going on the documentary or the factual area, you might record interviews. You might want to write this narration after, because that'll kind of be the glue. And that, I think, happens generally in documentaries. You're going to write a narration, and you might have, okay, here's the narrative or the narrator's voice that I want in my documentary. But you'll find that once you do the interviews and you start editing the documentary, you might need to, fine tune and tweak that initial narration to really make it fit with your documentary film and the story that you're trying to tell. So it's something to really consider in terms of, making that work. So, and then let's get to the next area, so we can explore a little bit more in the final draft. But let's also think now about other aspects. So we talked about it earlier, but that music video idea. So what if you want to write, if you have a piece of music and you want to create a script for that? So what I would recommend is taking the actual lyrics of the music and using that in the script, and then identifying visually what you're going to do with those lyrics. So it really gives you a guide of what's happening at each different point of the song. It's a really good way to write that. Now what we can do in Final Draft is we can do something that's called a 2-column script. And so you can have your lyrics for the song on the left, and then you can have a script on the right. And that helps you split up kind of, what's happening and gain a better understanding. And I think, again, I challenge everyone to think about other ways you can use screenwriting and the process of screenwriting and how it can be used in different art mediums and formats and so on. So again, just a quick review, we're looking at writing screenplays that can be for narrative, dramatic films that have fictional plots and so on. Then we're looking at documentary screenwriting or treatment writing, where we're just doing an outline that proposes what we hope to do with the film. And that's the thing, what we hope, because with a documentary, you're not telling people what to say. So they might say something that you didn't even expect. And that's going to change the story and the outlook. You might discover new things. And that's really the fun part of documentaries, is that you discover so much in the interviews, things that you might not have known and not be aware of. There's always new things to learn. I don't think I've ever worked on a documentary where there hasn't been some new discoveries. And then we're looking at audio podcasts, creating narrative ones. So very similar to the fictional narrative film in the screenwriting process. So we still establish where we are, but now we have to think and talk about sound as our describing factors. So we're going to need a narrator to tell us where we are, or characters can talk about where we are. But you need something. Sound effects can be really important. So you might want to have notes on sound effects, music, But at the same time, those kinds of notes can be in a screenplay for a narrative film as well. So there's a lot of overlaps, and I think that's what's really exciting is that once I wanted to really start, breaking down that idea of that screenplays are just for screenwriting for a narrative film, but think of them as multi-purpose and what they can be used for and how they can work, right? So that's always a really neat idea of how can it work and where does it where can it work, right? And that kind of process there. Then we have the factual type. We can have the documentary type audio podcast. So getting back to that documentary outline, writing narration, putting in ideas of what the interviews, what you hope to do, questions, topics, that kind of idea. And it doesn't have to be overly complex, but the idea is that you have a guiding principle of the blueprint of what you want to do. And that one line idea, that holds true for all of these formats. What is the point? What is your beginning, middle, and end of the story? What is the point of the story? Really important for that structure conversation and what that means for everyone. So the one of the last things here, what I want to do is start to look at final draft, and then we're going to get into some really specific. Next week, we're going to start to look at the specific ideas of screenwriting for a narrative short film. Then week 3, we're going to look at the documentary writing process specifically. Week 4, we're going to look at the audio podcast process specifically. So that's going to be our outline as we go forward. But I wanted to look at introducing this the final draft software a little bit more. So I opened up here. Now I'm just going to close this. I'm going to say let's do something new. So here's a new untitled novel. Let's do a new. Let's close this. So I'm going to open this up again here. Here we go, final draft. And I'm going to say choose template. So it gives you all these ideas. So I'm going to say, hey, let's write a script, screenplay, new. And here's my screenplay. So let's go full screen here. So here's a script, screenplay. You can see blank slate. We're just starting out. What is it going to look like? What does this mean? And we just start writing. And what it's going to do is once I go I or E, it's going to say, hey, do you want interior, exterior? So I'm going to say exterior, and I hit tab, and I can say exterior, coffee shop, day, and you can see all these options I have, day, night, afternoon, so on. Okay, so day. Then I'm going to hit return. And now I'm going to get into the description here. A large lightning bolt strikes a tree directly outside the coffee shop. Okay, now I'm going to go inside. Oops, and I spelled coffee shop here, wrong. A man sits at a window side table. He jumps back as the bolt causes the tree to glow. Put a name. Henry. Holy crap. That was close. Right, so character and so on. So that's all we have to do for formatting. And all I'm using are the return keys and the tab key. And Final Draft on an iPad does the same kind of idea. So we have, again, our headers, exterior, what the location is, time of day, description of what we're seeing, character name, then their dialogue. And that's the screenwriting format. And we just keep going from there on and on and on. And that takes us through the process of screenwriting and how that works. So that's the main objective here is, just you can get started if you have a Final Draft for your iPad, you can start exploring that format. And what we're going to do is then next week we're going to look at how do we write a short script, and then also from there we're going to go into the ideas of doing the documentary, so the documentary treatment outline, and then we're going to look at the podcast. So we're going to, and then throughout, we're going to keep looking at how a lot of things can be the same or different, and those kind of overlaps in the topic. So a lot of interesting things to look at. So again, remember to join us this masterclass. So it's 4 weeks in total. So I want you guys to join us for next week. For this week, I encourage you to open up Final Draft if you can have it on your iPad, or visit one of our library partners. Use Final Draft software there. Just explore it. Do like what I did. Just interior, write a little scene, character, name, and some dialogue, just to get familiar with the program. So that's the main thing we want to do. And in the meantime, think about a story, a narrative, fictional story, a short that's a few pages, 2-3 pages in length, that has a beginning, middle, and end. That's something that you'd like to write. And I'm going to challenge everyone to write a screenplay for a short narrative film, and then when we move into the week after that, the documentary treatment, I'll challenge everyone to write a documentary treatment, and then we'll have an audio podcast as well, script. So, by the end of this, you'll have some experience in understanding and writing in these different formats in storytelling and screenwriting, and really broadening the perspective of that it's not just for narrative films, but you can be used for many different things. The great thing about Final Draft is you can even go to a novel mode and you can write a whole book in it. So it's a super word processing software that has the ability to remember your settings, your character names, and so on. So it's a really great tool in writing in general. So that really is the main thing I wanted to get through. So that was our Final Draft quick demo. And thanks again for joining us. This was the Masterclass Screenwriting. This was week 1, scripts, formats, and creating a story. I want to thank all our partners in this. So we have the Canadian Council of the Arts. Then we have our library partners, where you can find Final Draft on our digital arts computer stations. We have the Collingwood Public Library, Blue Mountains Public Library, and the Wasaga Beach Public Library. Thanks for joining me, and be sure to join me for next week as we go right into screenwriting for a short narrative film. All the best, and I'll see you guys next week. Take care.